All right, so here's our second lesson in factoring, and we're going to be talking about equations that kind of have a trick to them, one little thing that makes them just a little bit different than the first set of equations that we did. So remember, anytime we're factoring, we have two things we have to do first, and that is we have to consider our GCF and take that out, and also our equation needs to equal 0. Those two things always have to happen before we can do any type of factoring. So today, the equations are going to be different because we're talking about when this first number, what we know as the slope, quote unquote, right? When the first number is not 1. So we're talking about when this slope is not equal to 1. Remember from yesterday, we did a few things and we were trying to figure out the pattern, right? And the top number is always the product, which comes from, yesterday it came from the last number, and I'm going to show you something that's a little different today, and the bottom is the sum. Okay, so the things that you need to take a note of, if I were taking notes, I would definitely make sure you write down this equation, ax squared plus bx plus c. The product for today, because the first number is not 1, the product is not just c, it's whatever you get when you multiply a and c together. The sum still comes from the middle number, so the sum is still b. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like and how this actually ends up being just a little different when we work out the problems. All right, so here's our first problem. Remember, the first two things I always have to do, it needs to equal 0, and we need to take out any GCF. So I'm going to make it equal 0 first. 6x squared minus 21x minus 45 equals 0. And I need to take out a GCF. Now this gets a little trickier, but in time you should be able to see here that the GCF is going to be 3, which means I need to divide every single thing by 3. So 3 is now my slope, so to speak. And then my factors, or everything that's left, when I go through and divide, I get 2x squared minus 7x minus 15. Now here's where you should notice that something is different. We have never had this number here in the front, right? Like I took out the slope, but it didn't take out that number completely. So that's the difference for today. So to fix that, we're going to move it to the end. And we want to think about, now we're going to use the equation. EQN stands for equation. X squared minus 7x minus 30. All right, so if that's our equation, and I go to make my pattern, all right, if I draw my little puzzle out, and I make my pattern, I'm trying to pick two numbers that multiply to give me negative 30 and add to give me negative 7. And it may take you a minute to think about those. But hopefully you're going to come up with negative 10 and positive 3. So from yesterday, at this point, what we have is going to be everything that we did yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and bring my slope down, so that's 3. And then I have, let's see, x minus 10 and x plus 3. Now the issue is, if we go to check this multiplication, so just kind of pause with me for a second and listen. If we go back to check our multiplication, x times x gives me x squared, but the equation said that I was supposed to have 2x squared in the front. So, because we moved the 2 to the end, we have to kind of undo what we did. So I'm going to divide by 2. I multiplied by 2, so I have to divide by 2, which is then going to change my equation. Now this divide by 2, well, let's see what this does. All right, it's going to change my equation over to give me 3 is still my slope. I can do 10 divided by 2, so that's x minus 5. And then the other one doesn't divide. All right, so I'm just going to write it like x plus 3 times 2. Now, you, at this moment, you may say, okay, well, that still didn't fix the problem. You told me the problem was that x times x is x squared, and I lost the 2. Well, at this point, we still have the 2 lost. All right, this method is called bottoms up. And that is because if when you divide, something is left on the bottom, as in the bottom of a fraction, we have to pull it up to the top. All right, so think about this 2 as making like a circular path. I moved it to the end, all right, and then I have to bring it back to the front. So think about, just kind of see like the circular pattern here. I move it to the end, and then I bring it back to the front, which means my final factoring answer here is going to be 3x minus 5 times 2x plus 3. All right, those are my factors. When we go to find roots, they're the same as what we've done before. All right, so I've got a root here that is 5, 0. And the second root is sometimes a little confusing, but it's actually easier to look at this step before we did bottoms up, because my second root is going to be negative 3 over 2, 0. All right, I know that's a little tricky. I'm going to do one more so that you can kind of follow that whole process one more time. All right, this problem has actually already given us some help because this problem already equals 0. So the only thing I have to do to start off with is my GCF. So I think about the numbers 20, 40, and 25. And hopefully we're starting to recognize these pretty quickly now. We can divide a 5 out of all of those. That means my slope's going to be 5. And my new problem, or the same problem I guess, is going to be 4x squared minus 8x minus 5 when I divide everything. All right, now remember that front number is a problem. So for a minute, we're going to move it to the end. It's got to make a circular path in the end, but for right now, we're just going to move it. So my new problem to consider, I'm going to use the equation x squared minus 8x minus 20. So when I go ahead and make my pattern, I am looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 20 and add to give me negative 8. And if I think about those for just a minute, I think I'm going to come up with negative 10 and positive 2, which means my factors are going to be 5 times, let's see, x minus 10, x plus 2. Remember that 5 was just the slope. And this is the part that gets different because we moved the 4 to the end. It's got to make a circular path. So I've got to divide by the number I moved, which was 4. Do any type of division that you can. Those don't actually divide, but they do simplify. So I'm going to simplify 5 parentheses x minus 5 over 2, x plus 1 over 2. And now, remember, our method is called bottoms up. So they move to the end. Now they got to move back to the front. And now notice on this one, I have 2 2's that are going to move, which means my final answer, or factors, are going to be 5 from the slope, 2x minus 5, and 2x plus 1. Last step, if they're asking, is for us to give roots. Remember, roots are almost easier to look before you move the fraction. So if they tell you to factor, you need to actually move the fraction. Otherwise, you're going to kind of look at that second to last step. So roots are going to be 5. Remember, you have to think opposite. So positive 5 over 2, 0, and negative 1/2, 0. All right, we may spend a little while practicing this skill because this is really important moving forward, but make sure you've done your best to try to understand these two examples and get as many of the steps down as you can.